When a K-9 officer gave the order to attack an old man resting in the park, no one expected what happened next. The trained German shepherd froze, then did something that silenced the crowd. In that split second, the past came rushing back, revealing a bond that not even time, training, or duty could erase. The sun hung low over the quiet suburban park, casting long shadows across the grassy field. Children's laughter echoed in the distance, but it didn't reach the corner where an elderly man sat on a bench beneath an aging oak tree. His shoulders slumped with the weight of years, hands clasped in his lap, a threadbare jacket wrapped tightly around him despite the warm air. His eyes were distant, not in fear, not in confusion, but in that quiet sadness only life could teach. Then came the sound. Boots crunching gravel, radios crackling, the sudden shift in the breeze as a group of officers turned the corner. At the front was a tall handler, stern-faced, with a muscular German shepherd trotting obediently at his side. The K-9's coat was sleek, eyes alert, every movement a display of training and control. His name was Thor. But that day, something about him was different. One officer pointed toward the old man. "That's him, still coming around. He was warned." The lead handler narrowed his eyes. "Why's he even here?" another muttered. "Doesn't matter," the leader replied coldly. "Let's move him out." The group approached, boots forming a crescent around the bench. The old man looked up slowly, blinking against the sun. His voice was a soft rasp. "Is there a problem, officer?" "You were told not to come here again," the handler said sharply. "This is private property now. You're trespassing." The old man looked around, confusion furrowing his brow. "I didn't see any signs. I've been coming here for years, just to rest my legs." "No exceptions," the officer snapped, tightening his grip on Thor's leash. "You'll need to leave. Now." The old man began, but he was cut off by a sharp bark from another officer. "We gave you a warning already. Last time." Then the handler raised his hand. His voice rang out like a strike of thunder. "Thor, attack!" The dog tensed instantly, paws forward, body low and coiled. The moment felt frozen in glass. The crowd, now growing on the edges of the park, inhaled collectively. The old man's eyes widened in disbelief, and he pressed himself against the bench's backrest, shaking. But Thor didn't move. He stared at the old man, unmoving, ears stiff, tail frozen mid-air. "Thor, I said attack," the handler repeated, more forcefully this time. Still, nothing. Thor's powerful body quivered, but he stayed rooted in place. His eyes weren't blank like they normally were in duty mode. They were searching, studying, softening. The officers exchanged glances. "What's he doing?" one asked under his breath. "He's never disobeyed before," another said. "Not once." "Something's wrong," muttered the youngest among them. The crowd was whispering now. A woman was already recording on her phone. A child clutched her mother's hand. "Why is the dog just standing there?" The handler tried again. "Thor, engage! That's a direct command." This time, Thor let out a deep, low growl, but not at the old man. His head turned slightly, eyes flicking toward the officer who held his leash. The handler stiffened, tugging the leash slightly. "What the hell?" But then Thor took a step forward, not to pounce, not to strike, but with slow, deliberate curiosity. His tail lowered, body language changed, and the growl faded into a faint whimper. He walked toward the old man with careful steps, sniffing the air. The old man sat still, hands trembling slightly. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Thor paused just inches away. He tilted his head, studying the man's face. Then he leaned forward and sniffed the cuff of his sleeve. His nose brushed the man's fingers. Then, just as gently, He sat down. There was a silence so thick it seemed to mute the world. The officer's jaw clenched. "Thor, return!" The dog didn't move. Instead, he pressed his nose against the old man's chest. A familiar motion. A gesture not of duty, but of memory. The old man's eyes filled with moisture. His hand lifted slowly and touched the dog's face with the reverence of someone handling a sacred artifact. His voice broke. "Buddy?" The dog's ears perked. A tiny whine escaped his throat. "Buddy, is that really you?" the old man whispered. His hand trembled as it slid behind the dog's ear, a spot only a former owner would know. The dog leaned into the touch. The crowd was no longer whispering. They were silent. The handler, pale and rattled, took a step forward. "This can't be happening." The old man's shoulders shook as he let out a soft, cracked laugh, tears spilling down his cheeks. "They said you were gone, that you were too sick. They told me they'd have to put you down, all those years ago." The dog, Thor no longer, licked the man's hand. The leash slipped from the officer's grip. The old man gathered the German shepherd into his arms the best his fragile frame could, and for a moment, time stood still. "My buddy," he whispered again, burying his face into the dog's neck. "I thought I lost you forever. Before you scroll away." My heart honestly sank when I saw that 98% of people watch my videos, but don't subscribe. If this video made you feel even a little something, please consider subscribing. It might be just one click for you, but it means the world to me. And Buddy, the dog once trained to forget, to obey without question, let out a soft whimper and gently placed his paw in the man's lap. The same way he did the night before they were separated. The leash dangled uselessly from the handler's hand, swaying like a severed tether. Around them, the officers stood stunned, unsure of what they were witnessing. This wasn't a K-9 disobedience issue. It wasn't a malfunction. It was something no one in uniform could explain. A bond resurrected from ashes, undeniable and raw. The old man held the dog tightly now, as if afraid that the moment would vanish if he let go. His frail arms wrapped around the sturdy frame of the animal once known as Buddy. The way the dog leaned into him, not resisting, not confused but comforted, silenced every remaining skeptic. One officer finally spoke, breaking the stillness. "Sir, do you know this dog?" The old man nodded slowly, his eyes glassy but firm. "I don't just know him," he said softly. "I raised him. From a puppy." He reached down and gently cupped the dog's face, looking into his eyes as if searching for proof that his mind wasn't betraying him. "I found him on the side of a rural road. He was just a few weeks old, barely alive. Someone had left him there, like trash." A heavy silence blanketed the group. Even the children nearby stopped playing. The old man's voice was steady but low, like retelling a story long buried. "He couldn't even stand. I wrapped him in my coat and brought him home. I wasn't rich. Lord knows I struggled, but I gave him everything I could." "What was his name?" the young officer asked. "Buddy," the old man said without hesitation. The dog's ears perked again. "That was the only name he ever answered to. Until now, I guess." The handler was quiet. His gaze dropped. "His record said his name was Thor. We got him 3 years ago from a military surplus shelter. No history, just a tag and a note saying he was cleared for K-9 training." The old man closed his eyes for a moment. 3 years, he whispered. "That's how long it's been." He swallowed hard and looked back up at the officers. "I lost my job during the downturn. Couldn't afford my meds, let alone food for both of us. I tried to find someone who would take care of him, but the shelters were full. No one would help. I made the hardest choice of my life." His voice cracked. I left him at the shelter with his blanket and prayed someone would love him like I did." Buddy let out a low, soulful whine, as if remembering. "I thought I'd never see him again," the old man said, brushing the fur around Buddy's collar. "But he remembered me." The dog leaned his weight against him, a silent confirmation. Behind them, the captain of the unit arrived, his brow furrowed. "What's the situation?" An officer stepped forward, visibly shaken. "Sir, the K-9 disobeyed the attack order, approached the subject, appears emotionally bonded." "Emotionally bonded?" the captain repeated, his voice skeptical. He stepped forward to inspect for himself. Buddy's posture changed. He looked up but didn't growl. His eyes followed the captain's movement, but there was no aggression, only caution and protectiveness. "Step away," the captain said to the old man. Buddy immediately stood and moved between them, posture tense, head low, ears back. A soft growl rumbled in his chest. It was not an attack stance, but it was a warning. Everyone froze. "Stand down, dog," the captain ordered, tone sharpened. The growl deepened. The old man placed a hand on Buddy's back. "Shh, it's okay, boy." Buddy turned his head slightly toward him, the growl softening, then fading completely. The captain exhaled. "This is unbelievable." The handler rubbed the back of his neck, still trying to make sense of it. "He's never done this. He doesn't even react this way to me." The captain turned toward the old man again. "What's your name?" "Walter," the man replied. "Walter Hale." "Mr. Hale, we have procedures. This dog is a government asset." "I understand," Walter said. "I do. I didn't come here to cause trouble. I sit in this park because it's quiet, because it's where I used to walk Buddy every evening." The admission hit harder than expected. "I didn't know he was still alive," Walter added. "And I never imagined he'd remember me, not after being retrained, after all these years." The captain looked down at the dog again, then back at the leash in the handler's hand. "We'll need to report this," he said. "But I don't think protocol covers whatever this is." Then, without warning, Buddy did something no one expected. He gently grabbed the leash in his mouth, turned to Walter, and placed it on the old man's lap. Walter looked down at the leash, then up into Buddy's eyes. The meaning was unmistakable. He was choosing. Not out of rebellion, not out of fear, but out of something deeper, something no training could ever erase. "He's asking to go home," someone whispered. Walter's hand trembled as he gripped the leash gently, not pulling it, not holding it, just accepting it. The crowd that had once gathered to watch a man possibly attacked by a K-9 now stood in stunned silence, tears in many of their eyes. One woman wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, another clutched her heart. The captain didn't speak right away. He turned away, rubbed his temple, then finally said, "We're going to need to review his records. Medical, behavioral, we can't make promises." But his voice lacked conviction. Because they all saw it. The dog wasn't Thor. Not anymore. He was Buddy, and he had found his way back. Back at the precinct, the atmosphere was strangely quiet. No one joked around. No one made light of what they'd witnessed. Officers who'd served together for years couldn't find the words to explain what they'd seen in that park. It was as if something sacred had happened in plain sight, and no one dared disturb the echo it left behind. In the K-9 unit wing, Buddy lay curled at Walter's feet, leash still resting between them. Walter sat in a visitor's chair, slumped but calm, like a man who had traveled lifetimes in a single hour and finally stopped moving. Every few minutes, Buddy would raise his head and glance up, checking to see if Walter was still there. He always was. Outside the room, the captain stood with the handler and two senior officers, reviewing files, reports, and medical charts. The handler's voice was low, uncertain. According to our system, he passed all aggression and control assessments, no red flags. But if this is the same dog, it's not a match on paper, the captain said, but we've all seen it with our own eyes. An officer nodded. The records show he came from a transfer shelter after being flagged as unfit for readoption. Too timid, they said. But once he started training here, he excelled. He adapted fast, almost like he was already trained before. He was, the handler muttered. Just not by us. Inside the room, Walter spoke softly to the dog, unaware of the silent conversation happening beyond the glass. Do you remember the porch, boy? The one with the creaky steps? You used to leap over the last two like it was a game. Scared the mailman every time? Buddy's tail thumped softly against the floor. Walter chuckled under his breath. And the blanket? That old brown one? You used to drag it around the house like it was treasure? Even tried to bury it in my closet once? The dog leaned his head on Walter's knee, a soft sigh escaping him. He was home, no matter where the walls stood around him. The door creaked open slowly, and the captain stepped in. His expression wasn't stern this time. It was gentle, tired. Mr. Hale, he said, we've gone through the files. There's no clear evidence tying Buddy's past to this precinct's records. The shelter that transferred him is long shut down. The microchip matches our database, not yours. On paper, he's ours. Walter nodded slowly. I understand. But, the captain exhaled. Paper isn't everything. The handler entered next, holding a report folder. He looked uncomfortable, but not hostile. I saw him snap into command training when I first got him. I always thought he was just sharp, smart, fast, different. But now, I see what it was. He paused, then looked at Walter. He wasn't learning something new. He was trying to remember who he was. Walter blinked, emotion rising behind his eyes. The captain cleared his throat. Look, we can't undo what's been done. We can't erase the last 3 years. But what we can do is decide what happens next. Walter looked down at Buddy. The dog gazed back, unwavering, as if ready to follow whatever came next, as long as Walter was there. We're recommending early retirement, the captain said. It's rare, almost unheard of, actually. But after today, no one's going to argue it. The handler nodded solemnly. He won't respond to commands anymore. Not the way he used to. It's like he's made his choice. Walter's lips parted, speechless. The captain placed the folder on the table. There's paperwork, a formal transfer of ownership. You'd be taking full responsibility. Medical, housing, the rest. I don't care, Walter said immediately. I'll do whatever it takes. He's mine. He's always been mine. A long silence passed. Then Buddy stood up on all fours, stretched, and gently placed his paw on Walter's thigh. The same gesture. The same trust. I used to joke he was more human than most people I knew, Walter whispered, rubbing the dog's ear. Looks like I wasn't wrong. The handler knelt beside them, holding out the leash. This time, not with authority, but with respect. I'm glad he found his way home, he said softly. Walter took the leash, nodding. But Buddy didn't need it. He sat, poised and calm, eyes watching only Walter. The captain turned toward the door, speaking over his shoulder. We'll finalize the paperwork this evening. You can take him home tonight. Walter froze, overwhelmed. Home, he echoed. He hadn't had one in years. Not really. Not since he gave Buddy away. He'd lived in a small rented room above a store, too modest to be called a home. But now suddenly, with this dog by his side, it felt possible again. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the officers gathered in the lobby to see them off. A few nodded in quiet approval. One officer clapped Walter gently on the shoulder. Another knelt to say goodbye to Buddy, who gave a single respectful lick to the back of his hand. When they reached the glass doors, Walter paused and looked down. "You ready, boy?" Buddy didn't wag. He didn't bark. He simply stood tall beside him, calm, proud, and still. And together, they walked out of the building. Not like a retired officer and a broken man, but like family, reunited at last. The city buzzed outside the station as Walter and Buddy stepped onto the sidewalk, a man and his dog once more, no longer bound by uniforms or commands, but by a thread of love that had endured across time, loss, and silence. Walter clutched the leash gently, but Buddy didn't need guidance. He walked beside him with the quiet grace of an old companion, slipping comfortably back into a forgotten rhythm. They turned the corner and began their slow walk toward the bus stop, a walk that felt like reclaiming a life thought long gone. The streets around them blurred with motion, cars, strangers, neon lights, but Walter barely noticed. He kept stealing glances at the dog beside him, disbelieving and quietly grateful. "Look at you," he whispered. "Still so strong. Bet you'd outrun me 3 times over if you wanted." Buddy glanced up at him, then bumped his nose gently against Walter's hand. Not demanding, just present. Walter smiled through the sting in his eyes. "I used to bring you to this diner on 8th, he said. "They had a waitress who'd sneak you bacon when the boss wasn't looking." He paused. "You remember that? You always sat like the world's most polite gentleman. Not a bark, not a whine, just those eyes." The eyes were the same now, watchful, loyal, impossibly deep. The bus arrived with a hiss of brakes. The driver raised an eyebrow at the dog, but said nothing when he saw the way Buddy pressed close to Walter's leg. They climbed aboard and took the rear seat. Walter let the leash rest loosely on his lap, and Buddy curled beside him, head resting on Walter's worn coat. Passengers stared quietly. One older woman finally leaned over. "That a service dog?" Walter looked at her and smiled faintly. "No, ma'am. Just an old friend who found his way back." Buddy closed his eyes, calm, content, at peace. When they finally reached the small neighborhood where Walter lived, the night had fully set in. The streetlights glowed golden. Walter shuffled toward his building, a modest brick complex with creaky steps and flickering hallway bulbs. He paused before the door and looked at Buddy. "You probably don't remember this place. It's not much, but it's home. Or at least, it will be again." Inside, the room was small, a worn recliner, an old bed, a coffee table stacked with newspapers. Walter hesitated near the door, unsure. But Buddy moved first. He trotted in, made a slow circle in the center of the room, then walked over to a dusty, folded blanket tucked in the corner. It was brown, frayed, faded from years of washing. Walter froze. "I kept it," he whispered. "After all this time, I couldn't throw it away." Buddy pawed the blanket once, then laid down on it, curling into a loose circle, exhaling a deep breath that sounded like release. Walter sat down slowly, his knees stiff, heart full. "I thought I was done," he said aloud. "Thought I'd just fade out quietly with no one to notice. But you—" He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "You remembered me." That night, Walter slept for the first time in months, not in restless fits, not with ghosts keeping him awake. Buddy slept beside the bed, his breathing steady, his tail occasionally thumping against the wall in dreams. The next morning, Walter woke early, a strange energy humming through him. He shuffled to the kitchenette, poured a cup of instant coffee, then pulled an old shoebox from the top shelf. Inside were photos, yellowed, curled at the edges. Most were of a younger Walter, scruffier, happier, and in many of them, Buddy as a pup. Digging in the garden, tearing up a newspaper, sitting on the porch in the rain. Walter laid the photos out across the table. Buddy wandered over and stared at them. His nose touched one, the photo of him asleep in Walter's lap during a thunderstorm. "You were never just a dog," Walter murmured. "You were my reason. You made the bad days feel survivable." He picked up the photo and held it to his chest. For the next few days, the story spread quietly. The video from the park had gone viral, millions of views in just 48 hours. Strangers commented with tears in their eyes. Some shared their own stories of lost pets and found souls. News outlets called the station. One even reached out to Walter, offering a modest donation fund set up by viewers who wanted to help. Walter declined the interviews, but he accepted the kindness. With the money, he bought Buddy a proper bed, new food bowls, and even a sturdy collar with a brass tag that read, "Buddy, if found, please return to Walter. We belong to each other." At the station, things shifted. Officers who once saw dogs only as tools began to see something more. A younger K-9 trainee was nicknamed Echo, after one handler joked that maybe dogs didn't just learn from us, maybe they remembered more than we knew. The captain kept a photo of Buddy and Walter on his desk, not as a reminder of a failed command, but as proof that some things, loyalty, love, memory, were stronger than protocol. One evening, about a week after Buddy came home, Walter took him to the park again. This time, no officers stopped him. No angry voices, no leashes tight with command. Just the old oak tree, the bench, and the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. Walter sat. Buddy curled beside him, and for the first time in years, everything felt right. Weeks passed, then months. Life, in its quiet way, began to bloom again for Walter. His steps were still slow, his hair still silver, but something in him had shifted, as if the reunion with Buddy had stitched together the frayed seams of his soul. They walked every morning, just as they had years ago. Down the cracked sidewalks, past the flower shop where the owner now waved at them daily, toward the diner where the same waitress, now grayer, slower, recognized Buddy the moment he stepped through the door. "Is that?" she asked, hand fluttering to her chest. Walter smiled. "He remembered you, probably hoping for bacon." She laughed, blinking back tears. "Well, tell him I haven't forgotten how polite he is." And just like that, things began to feel familiar again. The local news eventually convinced Walter to do one small interview. He sat on a park bench with Buddy at his side, a modest smile on his face as he spoke into the microphone. "I didn't expect anything," he said softly. "Didn't think I'd ever see him again, but somehow, he found his way back." Buddy leaned his head against Walter's leg. The camera zoomed in. "He never stopped being mine," Walter added. "Not for a second." The segment aired that evening. Millions more watched. The internet exploded with tributes. Artists drew sketches. Musicians composed soft piano scores beneath clips of Buddy refusing to attack. Commenters from around the world called it the purest act of love they'd ever seen. But for Walter, all the noise faded into the background. His world was now centered around quiet joys. Morning walks, warm meals, naps beside the window with Buddy's tail tapping softly in rhythm against the floor. One evening, as winter approached, Walter sat on his porch, a blanket around his shoulders, a cup of tea cooling on the table beside him. Buddy rested at his feet, eyes half-lidded, ears twitching every so often at the sound of distant wind chimes. Walter looked up at the stars. "You know," he said quietly, "I don't have many years left. The world's changed too fast. Sometimes I feel like I don't belong in it anymore." Buddy raised his head and looked at him, a soft sound rising from his throat. Not a bark, not a whine, just presence. But having you here, Walter whispered, it makes me want to try. And they stayed like that for a long while. Man and dog. Silence and memory. Peace and warmth. One morning the sun rose pale and gold. Frost kissed the edges of the windows. Walter stirred slowly in bed, the weight of age pressing against his chest. He blinked, reached down. Buddy was there, always. He sat upright, watching Walter with those eyes, filled with the same loyalty they'd held as a pup, as a canine, as a soul who never forgot. Walter smiled weakly. Morning, boy. But Buddy didn't nudge him or whine. He stood, placed his paw on the edge of the bed, and waited. Walter tried to sit up but winced. His body was slower now, stiffer. Breaths came shallow. He leaned back, head resting against the pillow. Guess I don't have the spring I used to, huh? He chuckled faintly. Buddy climbed onto the bed, gently, carefully, no sudden moves. He laid beside Walter, resting his chin softly on the man's chest. Walter's hand reached up and found the fur behind his ear. Still here, he whispered. Good boy. The day passed quietly. By nightfall, neighbors hadn't seen Walter leave. A knock at the door, no answer. Concerned, the building manager used the spare key. They found him in bed. Still, peaceful. Buddy was lying beside him, eyes open, not alarmed, just calm. His head still on Walter's chest. The paramedics arrived, voices hushed. One knelt to check Walter's pulse, then nodded slowly. The building manager stepped closer, eyes wet. He went in his sleep? Looks like it, the medic said. No signs of struggle, just peaceful. They paused, then looked at the dog still resting beside him. Who's the dog? One whispered. The manager wiped his face. That's Buddy, his best friend. Buddy didn't move when they tried to coax him away. Not until one paramedic knelt, extended a gentle hand, and whispered, Come on, boy. He's okay now. After a long moment, Buddy rose. He looked at Walter's face one last time, then stepped down. Walter's funeral was simple, just as he'd wanted. A small group of neighbors, a few officers from the precinct, and the waitress from the diner all came. The captain from the K9 unit arrived, dressed in uniform, hat in hand. Buddy sat beside the casket, unmoving, regal, still wearing the brass tag that Walter had given him. The captain stepped forward and placed a folded note on top of the casket. It read, For the man who taught a dog how to remember love. Later that day, the city council made an announcement. In the park where it had all started, beneath the oak tree where Walter used to sit, a small plaque was installed. It read, In memory of Walter Hale and Buddy, a man who never gave up, a dog who never forgot, and a love that defied time. Buddy was adopted by the young officer who had first doubted everything, the same one who'd said, Something's not right. Only now he understood. And every year on the same date, Buddy was taken to that park. He would sit quietly by the plaque, ears high, tail slow and steady, waiting, remembering, loving. Because some bonds don't fade, some hearts never forget, and some stories are meant to be felt forever.